I'd like to welcome Brian Moran, November 9, Alpha Delta Golf, and he will be presenting about WSJT-X, a look into new developments. He is one of the key software developers of WSJT-X software for the FT8 protocol.
So I thought we would talk about some things that you probably are familiar with, and maybe give you a little backstory for the little color behind how things happen and why things are the way they are. First of all, I thought maybe you folks would like to know about some historical highlights, and you know the WSJT project started in 2001. So this is going to be 24 years of software development. I wasn't involved until the last 4 or so years-ish, although even with when we were going to Mellah Sharif, um, I was making some changes and submitting them to the development team before I had a deeper involvement. But the first release of WSJT-X was in 2005, and FT8, which kind of is what has been a boost and a bane to amateur radio, depending on your views. First appeared in 2017. Seems like in some ways we've had it's been really been that long, or gosh, that doesn't seem that long ago. Foxhound mode, which is near and dear to us as DXers, appeared in February of 2018, and FT4 appeared in 2019. Superfox mode, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute, appeared back in earlier of this year. So I pulled some data from Club Log just because it's fun to see this stuff. But in November 2024, counting up all the queues uploaded to Club Log by mode, turns out that 48% of them were made by FT8, and sideband contacts accounted for 33.1% and CW 9.1%. And so you have to think that in that month, there were a lot of contacts uploaded from a few contests. So that's why you have a lot of sideband and CW contacts. But if you look on a daily basis, when there's not contest activity, there's a lot of FT8 or FT activity going on a more of a weekday basis. So that's kind of interesting. But I would invite you to take a look at the Club Log blog that is published, where periodically the stats are provided about the various modes. But he also, the gentleman, Michael, who G7VJR, who runs Club Log, publishes the link to where you can pull the data for the breakdown by mode by day from 2009. It's kind of really interesting to look at that data. So WSJT-X, as you probably know, the software itself after its release had some development derivatives made by some people who wanted to do things differently. Because it's open source software, people can't, the source code is published, and the source code is published with the caveat that, hey, the development team for WSJT-X would prefer that it not be used in robotic applications. For one thing, if you're using it for DX purposes, it causes contacts to technically be disregarded by the DXCC program. Although it's probably easy to understand that that's probably not happening. There are some programs like MSHV, JTDX, and WSJTZ. Some of these derivative programs do provide fully automated QSOs, and as such, kind of don't really follow the intent of the licensing for the code. And so that has caused some friction over the years. I don't know what more to say about that. There's a version of WSJT-X, and it's called WSJT-X Improved by UVA DG2YCB. Now, UVA is on the WSJT-X development team, but he's a prolific programmer, and a lot of features that are convenience features, nice graphics, better ways of sorting, better accommodations of various displays and color are in his programs, which he calls WSJT-X Improved. And he actually does have 3 versions. He has a version that's suited more for widescreen displays. He has a version that's suited more for small screens and laptops. I would invite you, if you want to try an alternative to WSJT-X that really does embody the spirit and the latest developments in WSJT-X, to go look at UVA's programs, because they are quite nice. He does make more frequent updates and faster bug fixes on his website. He always includes the latest hamlib files. So if you're having any rig control issues, they sometimes are attributed to issues in the hamlib libraries for running your cat control. He always has the latest and up-to-date versions of that. And as I mentioned, there are many nice improvements in UI features he has with his version of the software. Again, when change is made in WSJT-X builds, it usually makes it into his software, and sometimes you'll see features in his software before it gets into the mainline builds. So you could see where our development is going by downloading and using some of those programs. The release candidate that we are on now is WSJT-X 2.7.0, and it's release candidate 7. The initial release of 2.7.0 was in May of 2023, over a year ago. And for EME users, we had some specific changes, and it's more of the members of the development team making changes to suit their modes of operating. K1JT Joe is a real big EME UHF VHF guy, and so when he gets an idea, it gets implemented for the way he operates, and sometimes it gets in there. There were some convenience features for updating the databases that are used with the apps, like the CTY files, which control how the countries are represented, depending on the call signs, as well as the latest hamlib version. So now you can just click on a button and download hamlib. There are also some convenience features for Fox operators in the latest version of WSJT-X 2.7.0. Superfox mode was also introduced this year, and along with that, we had a verification scheme for verifying that the Fox really was who they said they were. There have been some issues where DXpeditions were being spoofed by Slims or pirates. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Then in the latest version, which is coming out, which you'll see shortly, there's a messaging system that's overlaid onto the WSJT-X messages. We'll talk about that. And there are always tons of bug fixes in each of the releases as they're made. And sometimes those bug fixes come in as a consequence of people like those on this call saying, "Hey, I noticed this weird thing," and we go and find it. Or even better, if folks provide us code that says, I noticed this weird thing, and here's how you fix it. That's even better. So WSJT-X Superfox mode, to understand why that was incorporated earlier this year, during the regular Fox transmission interval, what you have is the Fox was transmitting up to 5 little segments of about 50 some hertz, but the spectrum that the hounds are listening, the hounds are the people that are trying to call the Fox, could expand out to, say, 3,000 hertz. So on the intervals where the Fox was transmitting, a lot of spectrum was being unused. Also, when the Fox was using more than one stream, the power drop-off was quite severe. And you pay a penalty of a lot of dBs when you're running 5 streams. So DXpeditions typically need big power, legal limits to run 5 streams unless the conditions are exceptional. And there are ways of utilizing more bandwidth and different types of codes and coding to use that bandwidth to get better signal to noise ratios for under those conditions. So for Superfox, the different encoding scheme is taking advantage of 750 hertz to about 2262 hertz in the spectrum, and it's a constant envelope waveform that is more easily amplified and doesn't suffer from the penalty, and it sends the same amount of bits every time. So you're always sending the number of bits that would support up to 4 Hound signal reports and 5 RR73s. And that's a pretty big increase. We used to just have 5 streams with Fox Hound mode, but with Superfox encoding, you can get 4 signal reports and 5 RR73s in one go. So if the queues are being kept full and conditions are great, you can get really rocking. And I have a comment from a DXpeditioner a little bit later on. I'll read for you folks. So this was initially released, and when the initial release happened, it didn't have the benefit of having had a DXpedition use it. So the first DXpedition that did use it was out to the Pacific K8S, if I recall, and we had bugs, and it caused Superfox to not perform to spec. And what that means is that even though there were a lot of people calling, there were issues where not all of the slots, so the opportunities to send signal reports or RR73s were being used. We had issues where the Fox was not able to process all the callers. We had at one point, over 200 stations calling, and caused there was some buffer overflows when we didn't anticipate that many people simultaneously being received and decoded. So we just had some growing pains where they weren't optimally working. And so we were trying to get new versions to the folks to get them to use them as these issues were being found. And we think that during that DXpedition and subsequent ones, we knocked out a lot of the bugs. There are some other issues, though, that people noticed that if the Fox wasn't being received at a high signal level, it was being received with a high signal level, that sometimes the stations that were calling the Fox were not being decoded. And it turns out that we had an issue in a decoder where 2 loud signals were not being decoded correctly. So we had to fix that stuff. So there were some growing pains and teething pains. And so the initial perception was, the Superfox thing is not as good as the regular Fox Hound. But up until recently, latter part of the summer, pretty much all the known issues have been resolved, but there are some marginal conditions on 160 and 80 meters where the Superfox waveform isn't as well supported under those conditions, and we do see some DXpeditions falling back to going one stream Fox Hound for the ability to take advantage of the maximum signal to noise ratio extraction, and also take advantage of being able to use the queuing features in the Fox Hound mode. So I would argue that Superfox now is totally viable under pretty much 90% of all conditions you'd want to use it, especially in the high sunspot cycle like now. And in fact, recently in November, Al, K7AR, after his Fox Whiskey 7 Alpha Alpha DXpedition in November, sent a little piece of email to the development team, and I'll just read this thing. As a regular Fox, I would fill up the queue and wait a while as it emptied and add more callers. I would watch for a couple minutes as this happened. As a Super Fox and Hound, there's no waiting. I work Ned, one of the other hams helping us out. And he went from the station's calling window to the queue to an on-air message in less than 1 second. That must mean his queues were getting emptied. I said to myself, what just happened? Then the same thing happened with 5 callers, from the station's calling to the queue, calling in the queue to on air instantly. Things happen so quickly, it's common to see the queue mostly empty. I'm working hard to keep the queue going. It empties so fast. This will be a great feature for large Bouvet type expeditions. So we think we've got this nailed now, and the performance is really good. I know Robin, WA7CPA, is on the call, and she was working with us during some testing we did back in October and November. And that's when things were really clicking, that we were verifying that we are able to, with Superfox mode, use really low power, yet be able to still work really high rates. And so the 9 potential responses to progress the QSOs really get through those queues fast. It's pretty amazing. So when we have some more DXpeditions, we'll try those out. So let's talk about the Fox verification feature, which also got a lot of play and comments over the last few months. In November of 2023, a DXpedition that I was involved with, H44 Whiskey Alpha, did website verifications of Fox transmissions. And what this means was, every now and again, we publicized beforehand that we would send a number from us, and that you could go to a website, plug in that number and the timestamp of the interval when it was decoded to see if it was really us transmitting. And so how this works is we would send a one-time code, time-based one-time code, sort of like some of you who are used to using services on the internet. You have an application on your phone. There's Google Authenticator, there's Microsoft Authenticator, there's LastPass and 1Password that have all these TOTP code generators where you put in 6 digits. It's pretty much exactly that, except we're sending that number over the air, and only the people who know the seed value, and that's our servers and the DXpedition, are cryptographically able to encode that. What we found was, even though it worked for H44WA, it was pretty much a pain in the butt to type in the timestamp and the code to actually do the verification. So people like to see it, but it was really beyond the capability of most of the hounds to do the manual lookup. So what happened in May of 2024 was the need for doing verification of the DX is coming to a head, and a scheme to do this verification of Fox transmissions, but using a different scheme, was put in to the software that was released in May. Well, a few days later, someone reverse engineered that and published the details, and anyone could do it. So that was cracked in May of 2024. So there was a scramble in the development team to try to find another alternative that would be more difficult to do that. One of the design criteria initially was thought that, hey, this should work without the internet because, right, it's ham radio. Well, turns out it's not a big deal to require the internet connectivity, because 99% of the people that are using the software on the internet are using the software are connected to the internet. And kind of disabling the stunting the development because you have the requirement that you can't use this thing that 99% of the people have was maybe not the right design choice. So what we did is in summer of 2024, we rolled the H44 Whiskey Alpha scheme, built it right into the WSJT-X software, and it's been in there ever since. There were some initial issues with people needing to be able to download some libraries to do secure communications on their computers. And it's because of the ITAR gray area about whether or not the encryption software, which is classified as ammunition under ITAR rules, can be distributed by us. We just said we're not going to get involved in that. You can go get the libraries yourself. And so that's added a little bit of a speed bump to people getting connected. But in general, folks seem to be able to do it now, and seems to be working pretty well. So far, there hasn't been a great hue and cry for the requirement for internet connectivity. And there are a lot of stations doing the verifications. I run the server that does the verification, so I see the traffic coming in, and we get thousands and thousands a day. And those are just the ones I see that make it past the levels of caching that we have on the front end. So we do a lot of caching. So we're getting some multiple of that on a daily basis for verifications now. So let me tell you about a feature that's coming in the release candidate number 8 called QSY messages, or in general, WSJT-X messaging. Then this feature that's coming was originated from W3 Sugar Zulu. It's still experimental. It's going to be in there. Maybe people will like it. Maybe people will hate it. We occasionally pull things out of WSJT-X that aren't successful. And what it does is it uses a standard message that can be sent using characters that you decode on the screen, but it means different things. So, for example, in this pane, right, I don't know if my cursor is showing up, but in the 4 panes that you see above my head, there's a HF panel, a VHF panel, an EME panel, and a general panel. And there are different messages that can be constructed by clicking on a box, and you'll see that the message that is created is done so by a button being clicked and a message being created. So the fact that you want to move someone to a different band, K1JT, gets moved to say 20 meters a CW on HF, that encodes to a message of K1JT period RW060. And he's like, what does that mean? Well, unless you're running WSJT-X with the messaging, you're not going to know exactly what that means. But the WSJT-X clients that are coming out, if you have this enabled, will understand that that means that station should be asked to QSY. And UVA has implemented this in the RC8, and it's going to be interesting to see what the uptake. There is a general message pane which has various instances that might be of use. Again, this kind of came out of VHF and UHF operating, but for example, please call me by phone is a general message that could be sent, and that when one does so, you'll see that. Let me see if I can get out of the way. There you go. It creates a GG2 YCB.Zulu Alpha 011 message, which would be decoded on the other end to mean, hey, please call me. And so how it works is in RC8, if you have enable message pop-ups allowed in the new version, you'll get a pop-up on the screen if it's directed to you, where it says QSY to 144.550 megahertz mode of FM, if that was the message being sent. And there's also a monitor screen to to provide information on who's sending what messages on the band and what you're sending on the band. And this new feature could also be revised in the next couple of days to be slightly different, but this is the gist of it for sending messages. So you heard it here first. This is going to be in there when RC8 comes out. You don't have to use it, but you can use it if you like. Oh, that's going to be especially useful, I would think, for DX folks. Let me go back one. Where is it? Please transmit above 1000 hertz happens to be one of the general messages. And that seems to be, if you're on a DXpedition, for regular Foxhound, getting folks to transmit above 1000 is always a thing. So it's nice that that message is in there. So you folks might want to know where new features in WSJT-X come from. And in general, it doesn't come from when someone goes on to one of the news groups or sends a piece of mail that says, hey, I know that users would like to see, better rotator control in WSJT-X. I don't think there should be too many lines of code to make that happen. And it's like, well, if you don't think it's going to be too many lines of code to make that happen, then maybe you can do it and give us a pull request since it's open source. In general, the source code for WSJT-X is pretty big. There are a lot of moving parts in there, and changes that are of any type of complexity take a while to implement in such a way that it's tested or reasonably well tested and doesn't make and is made to not interfere with other operation that people have grown accustomed to. More likely to get a particular feature that you're interested into the app would be maybe be like, hey, here's a group of us and we run the whatever QSO party. We've implemented the exchange required to support our QSO party by extending the messaging system, which they could do. Here's a link to our repository on GitHub that has these changes. And GitHub is where code goes and is able to be shared and changes commented on and things of that nature. So someone could make a feature that would be of use to a lot of folks, send us a pull request. This has happened before, and it gets into the app. Again, that's kind of how the messaging system happened, where folks did build it into the app and test it quite a bit, and we just got it into the mainline build. I'd like to emphasize that WSJT-X is open source. Anyone can view, compile, and change the source code to implement the features that they'd like. And certainly it would be nice if those have general utility to share them with everybody. If you do find bugs in WSJT-X, the certain places that the developers hang out and read, they do read the groups IO groups. They also read the WSJT development list at SourceForge. I know I read this every day, and I look at pretty much all the messages that come. I get them in digest form, and sometimes I respond. But what I find is that a lot of the issues that are reported aren't actually issues. There are a lot of issues that happen to be related to cat control, which technically is in the domain of Mike W9MDB, who runs the hamlib layer. And actually, he's looking for help if anyone with software development would like to get involved in that. And one thing I also note is that the number one issue for people who had trouble with their WSJT-X application stopping during transmit happens to be RF intrusion. They're getting RFI. And that accounts for a lot of message. And so many, in fact, that Mike W9MDB has a standard stock. Here's how to check if you have RFI on your in your station, message for any kind of issues that smack of RFI. Also, if you're reporting bugs, best practice is to see if anything related to your issue is noted in the WSJT-X user guide or the groups.io groups. And you can also use the search feature in those places to look for words that are similar to the issues that you're having. And I can't emphasize enough the WSJT-X user guide. I even use it. I was looking to, it's like, oh, I just wish I had a way to do this one thing, which was, one key macro, if you will, to do a thing. And I went to the WSJT-X user guide and specifically to go find the key presses that the app uses for various things. And there's a table in there, tells you all the special keys. So if you don't want to use the UI, you can press like the pound sign or T or J while the app is running to do different things. Turns out the thing that I wanted was already implemented. I didn't even know about it. So it pays to read the user guide every now and again. Sort of like it pays to look at the N1MM logger user guide, even though it's huge. Maybe once a year before contest season to figure out how things have changed, what new features are there for doing some of the more multi things or stacking calls and stuff like that. So again, WSJT-X user guide can be your friend. Although there are some newer ways of getting at the information as well. I'll talk about that in a minute. If you are reporting a bug to us or sending me a mail, as many of you in the club have my email address, and I do respond most of the time. And if I don't, just send it again because sometimes I forget. But you should always include the software version, the operating system version, what kind of hardware you're running this on, how you've got it connected to your radio, what kind of radio you've got it going. Are you hooked up over, say a flex radio and over TCP/IP? Or are you hooked in through a CAD interface for ICOM, stuff like that. Also, what you expected the program to do and what actually happened that you think was not correct. And then one thing that's my personal thing is I really like good screenshots made with the snipping tool or the built-in screen capture. Sometimes it's really, really, really difficult to read like cell phone pictures and because of the moire pattern or just the resolution sometimes isn't the best. And when we are doing testing, and we get a large number of people helping to try the software out, say, on a testing session, it's really great when WAV files, which you can create for receiving basically received audio. You can pull it down from the save menu in WSJT-X. Being able to have those that demonstrate the issue is really helpful. And the files that your version of WSJT-X creates, specifically all.txt, which is a timestamp file, shows what that app is doing, are really useful for those types of issues. When we were debugging why the Superfox mode wasn't performing up to what we expected it to, we had to correlate data from the WAV files as well as the all.txt files. And, anecdotally, one thing we found is, we thought we were the box on their screen was showing that they were sending an acknowledgement to certain stations, but the received audio files were showing that was not actually getting inserted into the message that was being sent out. So that one was really difficult to find, and it could not have been found without the reception, the receiving of the wave files that showed the disparity between what the Fox was sending and what the hounds were receiving. That was a fun and difficult one to find. So RC8, the RC7 that everyone's using now, 270, is expiring on the 15th of this month, 2025. But I'm going to let you know that I think it's going to be out next week, maybe Tuesday. So that is when I think the software next version will come out, including the messaging system. Could be delayed, but everything points to about then for the next version being able to be downloaded and tested. RC7 expires, it'll say, hey, this is expired, you should get a new version. So you have two choices then. You could go to a non-expiring version, which will be like a 261, that's the main line. The RCs are kind of experimental and not released all the way. But I would suggest running RC8, downloading it and installing it. There's, besides the messaging system and some changes to the encoders, you've been pretty much running the same bits. It's nothing really risky in this next version. There is a pilot tone that the protocol uses, and it occurs at 750 hertz. And in the initial version that we released, actually previous to this version, it's possible to change a box to get the frequency off of 750, which is not doing yourself any favors. You want it to stay on 750, unless your rig can't has some weird offset, in which case maybe then you do want to do it. Then there's a FTOL value, which is kind of like the size that the algorithm, the size of bandwidth the algorithm looks in to find the pilot tone. If you make that too large, you're going to be using a lot of CPU and maybe be prone to locking on some different signal. So you want to keep that. If you know your rig's good and you if you're looking at the waterfall and you see that line that the D-Expedition is like 749, 752, and FTOL is like 50, there's no reason to mess with it because it's probably going to work. And FTOL 50 hertz, you're going to find that pilot tone and everything's going to be happy. We did have some folks who just like to tweak the knobs and see what happens, and sometimes that leads to bad operation. In fact, there was a bug where if you made FTOL too big, it would cause a crash. You can look at the waterfall and see the 750 hertz line if you can decode them. And at the same time, you should see little bits of the spectra lit up where the different tones are between 750 and 2262. That's much different than what you would see with regular foxhound, where anytime the fox is transmitting, the transmissions are going to be below 1000 hertz, and you're going to see, the little band. So you can inspect the screen and see, that. And if you're running audio and you're listening, you can hear the fox transmit, and if it sounds like a bunch of musical notes, that's more indicative of Superfox, where if it's the drone or kind of the harsh noise where they're running multiple streams, if you're listening to audio and they're strong enough, that's indicative of regular foxhound. Now, knowing whether or not the fox is using MSHV can be slightly more difficult. One of the issues is, well, I think right now, I'm not sure No, I think MSHV can. I was trying to understand whether the derivatives of WSJT-X have been updated to be able to receive the Superfox waveform, and I think MSHV might be able to. I'm not sure. I have not verified this, but the primary difference to note for MSHV is, unlike regular Fox pound mode in WSJT-X, MSHV will respond to people calling below 1000 hertz. And some DXers have noted that. And if they see calls below 1000 hertz being responded to, they themselves might call below 1000 hertz to get a leg up on the other guy. There's a downside risk. If you guess wrong and they're not using MSHV and they're using WSJT-X and you're calling below 1000, you're not going to get worked because WSJT-X won't even show the call sign on the screen of the caller below 1000 hertz on the Fox's display. You're just not going to see it. Also, you don't want to call too close to 1000 hertz, no matter what, if there's that line there, because if you drop a K3 too many times on your way to some remote island, it might shift its frequency, its TCXO one way, and your radio might be, shifted another way because it's hot in your shack, or it's cold in your shack, or it's not calibrated. You could be off enough where you might show up at 995 hertz on the DX, and he's again not going to copy you. Yeah, you can tell DG2YCB Uva that's great. It took a couple iterations, and I think there might be still a couple little weirdnesses, but they're cleared up for RC8. Yeah, that was a big deal. The Expeditioners also like the buttons because if you're running on non-standard frequencies, every now and again you want to drop down as a DXpeditioner to the regular FT8 frequencies, like later in the DXpedition when the rates are getting slow, and say, hey, H40WA is up at 091, in a message, and then then you have to switch back to Foxhound and go back to 091. And there were some weirdnesses with switching that just made it a pain in the butt, especially when you're tired and you've been doing that for a few days. I have one more thing to mention. So here's a fun thing. Everyone's talking about AI and what have you. There's a thing called Google Notebook LM. It's a service that Google has that allows you to provide references to their AI to draw upon. And what it will do is then you can ask it to generate a summary of the materials that you fed into it, and then create the equivalent of a podcast of those materials. So it kind of will, ingest this and then give you a summary of everything that you've sent in. I would invite you to go to this link, which is bit.ly, a bit.ly link, bit.ly/, and I made this link, WSJTX_podcast. Give it a listen. When you hear that, I want you to remember that the audio is being generated by a computer, and the two people that are talking don't exist, though that's also being generated by the computer. And I was listening to it this afternoon, and it's uncanny, how it's talking about and summarizing the information.